Now, to obtain reliable data in the study of the characteristics of human psyche and his personality, people use a large number of different methods and methods of research in psychology. For example, psychological experiment. Dear listeners, in the next 6 minutes I would like to tell you about a rather interesting psychological experiment that was conducted in 1968 by an American school teacher, Jane Elliott, on her students. The purpose of the experiment was exceptionally good: to demonstrate to children the horror of racism. Elliott was a junior high school teacher in the small town of Marysville, Iowa, a committed feminist and activist for the rights of national minorities. The experiment was designed to convey to younger students that racism is very bad. The reason for the experiment was the murder of black activist Martin Luther King in 1968. She divided all the children in the class into owners of blue and brown eyes. Those who had blue eyes were conditionally assigned high status, and brown-eyed people were declared representatives of the lower race. She asked them if they had ever noticed that society treated blacks, Indians, or Asians differently. The children replied that many do not consider them their brothers because of their skin color. Then Jane suggested that the children try to experience it for themselves, that it's like to feel rejected because of external signs. Blue-eyed status gave them certain privileges. For example, they could get a second meal in the cafeteria, they were allowed to play in the new gym, and their break was increased by 5 minutes. For brown-eyed people, restrictions were imposed. They were not allowed to drink from the communal fountain. Now they had to use paper cups. Their break ended 5 minutes earlier. They couldn't play in the new gym with the blue-eyed kids. All brown-eyed children were required to wear a special black collar, not allowing to adopt the status. In addition, the teacher repeatedly stressed that brown-eyed children are dumber, worse than blue-eyed, and constantly cause problems. It was convincing enough for the children to believe it. Once in this privileged position, blue-eyed children immediately began to behave arrogantly towards brown-eyed children, even insulted their classmates and applied various physical influences to them. Elliott wrote that it took only 15 minutes for children to transform from reasonably good children to wild, evil chauvinists. In addition, high status had another interesting consequence. The academic performance of blue-eyed children improved significantly, which is confirmed by the statistically significant data collected by Elliott. The performance of brown-eyed children has deteriorated by about the same amount. The next day, the groups of students switched roles. Now the blue-eyed children found themselves in an oppressed position. The brown-eyed ones might have been lenient with them because they knew that they were going through, but the children returned the favor. Jane Elliott's experiment caused a wide public response. In 1970, the press became interested in him. Jane was invited to TV and performed on the Tonight Shows with Johnny Carson. The documentary Eye of the Storm was made about this experience by journalist William Peters. Peters was present at all the lessons. The film was shown on ABC. The response was mixed. There were those who supported Jane in her initiative, but she also received a lot of outrage reviews. The experiment, of course, did not solve the problem of racism, but it was clearly updated. Later, another documentary was made, Class Divided. In fact, Jane's experiment as a schoolteacher had no scientific basis, and this is the whole complex of emotional and volitional reactions to the change of position, privileged or outsider. The experiment received a wide public reaction thanks to the film. However, the children who participated in the experiment later admitted that it made a complete revolution in their minds. Never again in their lives did they find the idea of racism attractive. Jane continued to conduct this experiment on her students over the years, despite the protests of some parents. Scientific studies of the Elliot experiment have shown that her method does moderately reduce prejudice, but its effects are still questionable. There is no clear answer as to whether the psychological damage from the experiment exceeds its beneficial effects. The criticism of Jane's method was that, although not explicitly, it incited the belligerent to humiliate a group of outsiders. She was also accused of not paying attention to social and political changes in society, and of instilling in white people a sense of guilt for their origin. Despite the criticism, Jane continued her work as an activist and an educator, and later began to conduct corporate training. She was invited by many companies that wanted to develop tolerance among white employees to people of other races. As a bonus, I would like to tell you about another psychological experiment. American cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted an advanced study of false memory in 1995. They gave participants to read descriptions of events that allegedly happened to them as children. Participants were asked to recall as many details of these stories. However, participants didn't know that relatives told only 3 stories. The fourth, about how the participant got lost in the store at the age of about 5 years, was invented by researchers. 25% of participants said they remembered a fictional event, although it was worse than the real one. With this research, Loftus proved the existence of false memory and demonstrated how false memories can be created. Research shows how unreliable memories can be and how easy they are to inspire.